Good morning. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Luke chapter 4, verse 14. Luke chapter 4, verse 14, then just hold your finger there because we're going to take a trip. We started way out in space there. I don't know if Reggie can back that up. We're going to start way out in space, and here we're going to go. We're going to zoom down on this little town in West Tennessee called Hornbeak, and it is like it's like a little speck on the map. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, but I don't remember very much about Memphis. The house I remember was on Chelsea Extended, the only house I remember us living in Memphis. I remember the train tracks across the street. I remember the two little girls who lived behind us. I remember there was a boy and a girl who lived down the street, and their parents had a greenhouse. We went down there to play, and I remember seeing my brother walk home from school, and outside of that, I can't tell you anything about Memphis. But that little town that you can probably just barely see up there is Hornbeak. And I can tell you a lot about Hornbeak. Now there's a reason I'm telling you this, so just hang on, okay? In my eye, I can tell you everything about that downtown. I think we moved there when I was about 4, maybe 5, I don't remember. The house that we live in now, that Mom and Dad live in now, that's still we, because it's still home kind of. I think Mom and Dad moved there when I was 5 or 6. I remember the other house. It was on Glady Holler Hill. It's a little white house. My uncle lived with us when we lived there. But most of my childhood was in this town of Hornbeak that if you counted all of the adults, all of the dogs, and all of the cats, you'd get about 400. Okay, and just hang on to that number because that's why it's important. And as I look at that downtown Hornbeak, if you ever want to go there, I'll give you directions. There was a drugstore. And there is Smith Grocery Store, which we had 2 grocery stores in Hornbeak, that little town. There was Smith Grocery Store, then there was bank, then there was Mr. Charles Barber Shop, where I always got my hair cut. Then there was Mr. Onan Hayes had a hardware store. On the other side of the street, there was post office. There was Darnell and Son Grocery Store, where I got my very first job. I worked on Saturdays. I made $15 a day, and all I could eat. And all I can tell you is they lost money, all right, because I could eat. I remember going up and down streets. There was a feed mill not far from where we lived. Mr. and Miss Short lived next door. They were our neighbors. Mr. Virgil lived on the other side. He was the other neighbor. Sammy Bell and Gary Eastwood and I tore the streets of Hornbeak up. And we went all over that little town, and I rode my bicycle probably on every square inch of both asphalt and gravel that town had to offer, because then we had gravel roads, not just asphalt roads, if any of you can remember back that far. Now here's the point of this story. Town of 400. If I got home and my mom said, "Where you been?" I better tell her the truth. Because most likely somebody has already told her where I've been and what I've been doing. We had a little elementary school, Hornbeak, the Hornbeak Green Waves. Boy, that was exciting times. We played Red Rover on the playground. You know, we lined people up against the fence and picked teams. I don't know, do y'all still do that at school? Man, to be honest, I tell people it was kind of like growing up in Mayberry, because it seemed like everybody knew everybody. We had 3 service stations. I remember all of that. We had a TV repair shop. Can y'all remember back when you actually had TV repair shops? You just didn't throw them away. You actually had them fixed, had little tubes in the back. That was really cool stuff. 400 people, and most of the time, if I got in trouble, I was in trouble before I got home. There were very few people, I think, in that town that I didn't at least know who they were, or they didn't know who I was. In Luke chapter 4, verse 14, Jesus goes home. And he goes to Nazareth. Now, just wild guess. How big do you think Nazareth was in Jesus' time, if estimates are right? 400 to 500 people. Kind of like Hornbeak. That's why I told you this first story. Because you know what? I think if Jesus grew up in a town of 400 to 500 people, and he's 30 years old, I got a feeling that most people probably know who he is. And in Luke chapter 4, verse 14, consider church. He goes to the synagogue. And he went to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue as was his custom. And he stood up to read. The scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him, and unrolling it he found the place where it is written, The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because He has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. And the eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." And all the people spoke well of him. And they were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. "Isn't this Joseph's son?" they asked. And Jesus said to them, "Surely you will quote this proverb to me. Physician, heal yourself. Do here in your hometown what we have heard that you did in Capernaum." "I tell you the truth," he continued, "no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian." And all the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. And they got up and drove him out of town and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built, in order to throw him down the hill or off the cliff. And he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. Why do you think all of a sudden they became so angry? Isn't it interesting? They all spoke well of him. Said, "Wasn't it Joseph's son?" And then Jesus makes a statement, and then all of a sudden they are so angry they want to throw him off the hill. The real reason was that the scope of Jesus' ministry was kind of repulsive to those in Nazareth. Remember those two stories? Hey, there was a widow, but she wasn't Jewish, and that's who Elijah went to see. And then there was a leper, and he wasn't Jewish, and that's who Elisha healed. The first implication that those in Nazareth and the Jewish people as a whole were just too hardened to accept God's gifts. You know what? God has gifts to give, but when it got time to give them, God didn't give them to someone who was in Israel. The second implication of that is that the non-Jewish people were more spiritually discerning, at least in those two instances, than Jewish people were. And so they became angry. And they wanted to get rid of him. Now there's a lesson in that for the church. And there's a couple of them, and we're going to kind of go through some of them, but one is, don't prejudge people who are searching for the kingdom. It's not us to decide who the kingdom is open to. Don't prejudge people who need the kingdom. Don't be like them. We say, you know what, as long as it's for us, it's going to be okay. Now we do things like this. You know, I just grew up in church. And I did. I'll just be right here honest with you in front of God and everybody at the whole assembly, right? I had two parents that if the door to church was open, where do you think we were going? We went to church. I had two parents, when there was Sunday school, guess where Greg was? Sunday school. I had two parents that I don't remember a lot of it, but they tell me it was true, that they had to drag me out by my ear in church because I wouldn't behave and sit still. I got a feeling. Now I can't, from experience, I don't know, but I would assume, based on the rest of my childhood, it could be that I got lit up on the backside a couple of times because I didn't behave while I was in church. But you know what? Kidding aside, I had parents who taught me godly values. Got parents who tell me what's important. God had parents who tried to nurture me in godly ways. So this isn't about, did you grow up in church? Or did your grandparents grow up in church? Don't tell me about your church family history. I want to talk about people who are searching and looking for Jesus. So who are you in that? So the interest in the kingdom isn't connected to any kind of political, geographic, ethnic, national, or economic factors. Boy, that's a tongue twister, isn't it? Political, geographic, ethnic, national, or economic factors. Well, there's a lesson for the church. Let me tell you about my nation. Let me tell you about where I live. You can't turn on the news. Or I don't actually turn on the news anymore. You can't pull the news up on the internet, which is the way a lot of us get our news nowadays. You know what? There's going to be something on there about some kind of racial division. There's going to be some kind of phrase thrown around. There's going to be some kind of implication about the divide in our nation between races, whether it's white or black or Hispanic or Oriental. There's going to be something on there. Somebody's going to coin a phrase, aren't they? Man, we're going to call it white this or black this or golly, we're going to come up with so many names. That's the world I live in. You pull up the news, there's going to be something about gender inequality, isn't it? It's the world I live in. There's going to be politicians fussing over immigration issues. Who gets to have citizenship and who doesn't? Do we build a wall? Do we not build a wall? Do we accept this group in? Do we not accept this group in? Do we put on a travel ban? Just a list of questions about immigration and people. And you know what? As far as I'm concerned, they're all political questions and the politicians can work it all out. I know what the spiritual question is. Spiritual question is, how many of those people need Jesus? That's the question for the church. And I'm going to ask you, don't get caught up in all of that stuff. Don't, as God's people, get caught up in all of that. I don't care what color you are. I don't care where you were born. I don't care what economic situation you're in. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care who your parents were. I don't care who your grandparents were. The only thing I care about is I know that you need Jesus. That's what I care about. And Jesus went to his hometown. He said, let me tell you about it. You're going to quote this parable to me, because he knew that the scope of his ministry was going to just rip his world apart. You know, if we're very honest with ourselves, the scope of our ministry ought to rip our world apart. We ought to leave all that political stuff on the side, and what we ought to do is go out and search for those people in our world who need Jesus, because the thing that unlocks the door to the kingdom is faith. Faith. I am looking to find people who need to develop faith in Jesus Christ. Look out in our community. Take a glance around. Think there's anybody in our community that needs to find faith in Jesus Christ? I know everybody knows about Jesus right now. They don't know about faith in Jesus. Think there's anybody in our community that we need to minister to? Think there's anybody in our community that we need to go out and try to reach? And why just think about terms within our own community? How about if we look beyond that? There are people in this world who need Jesus. They all look like us? No, they don't look like us. That's just a modern struggle, isn't it? No. Remember way back with James, man, you got a rich man and a poor man that come into the building. What do? What if you bring the rich man to the front and put the poor man in the back? No, that's favoritism. Okay, how about we bring the poor man in the front, put the rich man in the back? No, that's favoritism. No favoritism in the church. We treat each other the same. We treat each other through the way that God sees us. We treat each other through God's eyes. See, the people of Nazareth heard that message and they thought, man, we don't want that. And the question is, when we hear that message, do we want that? Do we want that? And I would tell you, yeah, we should want that. We should want that. We should want to be able to look at this world and see people through the eyes of God and know that the most important thing that we can do in this world is help others learn about faith in Jesus Christ. And that becomes our passion And that becomes our goal. There's another lesson, I think, in that, and that is don't be defined by the opinion of others. Boy, they all spoke well of him. Boy, those are gracious words that came off of his lips. Now, I'm going to confess to you. If I had been in Luke chapter 4, and I had stood up, and I had read from the scroll of Isaiah, and I'd read a very messianic passage, and then I sat back down, and everybody said, boy, don't he speak good. I might have been tempted from that moment to keep my mouth shut. I might have been tempted to just kind of soak up the praise. Boy, they like me. Have you ever been kind of in a situation where you might have needed to say something, but you didn't want to say it because you knew that the people that you were going to say it to kind of liked you? And you didn't kind of want to shake the boat? You don't want to rock the water? You just kind of wanted to sit there and listen? Think it'd been easier for Jesus just to sit there and say, well, you know, I think that sermon went pretty well. But the thing is, he knew he needed to say something else. Do we like it when other people like us? I've told y'all this before. I don't like to go out the back door and y'all say, you know, I think that's the worst sermon I've ever heard. That doesn't really, doesn't fill me up with a lot of pride. I've also told you, it bothers me sometimes when you like me. Because prophets, nobody ever really liked the prophet. You know, they got treated bad. Now, I don't want y'all to treat me bad, but I kind of struggle with that. I don't want y'all to think I'm the worst preacher either, but I don't want you to like me too much either, because I might not be telling you what you need to hear. So I'm caught in this quandary. Do you ever let the opinions of others shape you? If we're really honest with ourselves, we can answer that question. Usually we do. And not just religiously, do we? We do that in a lot of other ways. We do it intellectually and with sports and with jobs and with money and do what you know God needs you to do. And don't let the opinions of other people shape what that looks like, and don't let them put a lid on the talents that God has given you. Don't turn your back on something that God has set for you to do because somebody else might not like it or they might not approve of the way that you do it. Pursue God with that type of passion. And that's kind of the next thing. Be passionate about that to which God calls you. And I mean passionate about it. What are you passionate about? I mean, what are you really... Now, don't answer that unless you want to, okay? I don't want to hear y'all screaming out. Unless you want to scream out about your stuff from out there, and that's okay. But what are you passionate about? I mean, what do you really like? I mean, it just consumes your thought. You're thinking about it all the time. Now, I'm just kind of going out on a limb here, and it's okay. Just work with me just a second. Any of y'all ever been passionate about a relationship? I mean passionate about a relationship. I mean like you couldn't go a whole day without thinking about this person. You were just like, whoo, I cannot wait till Friday night. Whew. I mean, you are passionate. You're so passionate that if it came a big snowstorm, you'd find a way to get there. Nothing was going to keep you away. Jim Lee back there raising his hand. Absolutely. I mean, you were passionate about something. Passionate about God? I mean, not just that you won't... I know I'll give him an hour on... I mean, are you passionate about God? Not just, I'm okay with coming into the building on Sunday morning for an hour. Can you be passionate about serving Him? Has God called you to do something? I mean, that you're really passionate about. You think about it all the time. You wake up in the middle of the night, can't go back to sleep for thinking about it. You're pondering it. You're wondering about how it's going to happen. I don't want you to be a pew warmer. I don't want you to show up on Sunday morning, sit on a little pew, warm it up, and then get up and go, and then see you again next Sunday. I want you to find the thing that you're passionate about. I want you to find the thing that which God has called you. And I don't want you to look with little bitty eyes either. I want you to see the big picture. I want you to see the way that you can impact this world for Jesus. I want you to see the things that you can do. And when you look at that, I want you to look in a way that you understand that God's plans are eternal and all-inclusive. See, that's really kind of what happened in Nazareth. Yeah, it's not just about us. Not just about our little village. Not about just our little congregation. It's not just about you or your family. There is this vision that God has of His kingdom in this world that we get to be a part of, and His plans are enormous. Enormous. They transcend everything that we can even think about. They have implications far beyond things that we can even begin to imagine. That word eternal really throws me off. I know what it means. I understand it intellectually. But when I really sit down to kind of ponder that word, it really throws me off. Never ending. Eternal. You know why it throws me off? I don't have a lot of practical experiences with eternal. I don't have very many things in my life that don't grow old. I don't experience things very often that don't die. I don't own very many things that are never going to break. In fact, for most of us, we're just waiting on the next thing that's going to break, right? It's like car, and then something in the house, and got to repair this, and we've got to fix that. And my Jesus comes into this world to give me eternity. Do you know when Jesus read that passage in Isaiah, do you know He stopped in the middle of a verse? He stopped in the middle of the verse. He didn't read the last part of the last verse, which is about the day of vengeance. The reason he didn't read that is because that's what wasn't being fulfilled at that moment that he was sitting in the synagogue. What was being fulfilled at the moment he was sitting in the synagogue was the Messiah who was coming into the world. So he stopped. He didn't read the vengeance part. Is there a vengeance part to the verse? Is there a day of vengeance when God is going to visit? There is. And you say, okay, here it comes. You're going to try to scare us to death? No, I'm not going to try to scare you to death, but I'm going to tell you, you know what? That day's coming. That day's coming. The day when Jesus is going to appear in the heavens and everything that we know is going to be rolled up out like a scroll, and the earth is going to cease to exist, and God's kingdom is going to be renewed. It's going to happen. Now, I can't tell you when. Okay, I'm not a prophet, not that kind of prophet, but I can tell you it's going to happen. You know what will matter on the day that it happens? What we have done. What we have done. That's what will matter. On that day that happens, it probably won't matter how much money you made. It probably won't matter very much how many promotions you got. It probably won't matter too much how many ball games you attended. It probably won't matter if you went undefeated. Probably won't matter if you were the star of the team. Probably won't matter what kind of car you drove. And it probably won't matter what kind of house you lived in. You know what will matter? If you had faith in Jesus' Son and if you were passionate about the kingdom. That's what will matter. See, it's easy to get caught up in all the things that's happening in the world. A lot of things happening in the world are very important. A lot of things happen in the world impact God's kingdom. Jesus goes to Nazareth. He reads a passage. They speak well of them, and then they try to throw him out of the city because they couldn't handle the message. And I just want you to think, can you handle the message? Can you handle the message that Jesus' kingdom transcends everything on this earth? Can you handle the message that compared to Jesus' kingdom, everything on this earth is immaterial? Can you handle the message that Jesus' kingdom is the most important thing, not in this life, but in the life to come? Jesus' kingdom is the most important thing ever. Nothing compares to the kingdom of Jesus. Can you accept that message? Because I hope you can. Because that's the message that really matters. If you need to respond to the invitation in some way, I'm going to ask you to do it while we stand and sing.